I've had this one on my list to cast for quite some time from Sander over on Discord. We've got Khorne versus Tzeentch in Domination. Definitely a very interesting matchup. Khorne being the most balanced faction in the game right now, in my opinion, in terms of overall game balance. They do have quite a few matchups which are fun to kind of tinker around with, and this is definitely one where there's some interesting interactions. Of course, all Khorne demons have some spell resistance, which is definitely applicable here. You will be taking spell damage. Sometimes it doesn't end up mattering, though, like on your bloodletters, for example. If they take like a pink fire, that's the AoE one, right, to the face, they're going to take quite a bit of damage. But taking a look at the builds here from the outset, we've got an Exalted Bloodthirster up in the air to help pressure the Lords of Change. Exalted Bloodletters on the ground. Single Skull Cannon can be an interesting choice here. I kind of like this pick. A few Halberds, 3 Halberds, and 2 Fleshhounds as well. 1 Minotaurs with great weapons in reserve, which is a really interesting pick to me. A lot of people wouldn't think to bring this here, but I actually like this for a few reasons. Spawn is a big one. Spawn are relatively common in this matchup. Their armor sundering, good weapon strength, and mass helps Khorne kind of helps Tzeentch control the battlefield against Khorne. Speaking of which, we've got Cultists and Blood Reaper for the 2 hero choices. Looks like the Blood Reaper is on foot. And some dual hand weapon warriors, 1 more Halberd, 3 Bloodletters, and 2 Fleshhounds for Tzeentch. Exalted Lord of Change, the Lord of Metal, the brand new buffed Exalted Flamer with more range and ammunition. Should be interesting. The range specifically doesn't interact very well in this matchup because Khorne doesn't really have any range of their own. This 150 range, though, is quite useful against like Cathay and Kislev as well. Any units, any faction with units that have like in the 130, 140 range, this is going to be great against. But we'll see here if it's able to do some good AoE damage. A couple spawn as well, pink horrors, and 5 blues to start. Very heavy on the blues. Lord of Change in reserve, like these guys for 1700, can provide a little bit of elite punch. And being that the Lord of Change is Lord of Metal, you can take this Exalted Boy. The regular Lord of Change can bring Lord of Tzeentch, and you could have still taken 2 Cultists, although he chose not to. Instead, just going with 5 Forsaken, a couple pink horrors, and 3 Furies of Tzeentch. The Furies, I've mentioned this like in basically every single Khorne video recently, I want to say. I don't really love Furies against Khorne. They don't trade super well against that many Khorne units. Like rear charging Fleshhounds is probably their best use case, and even then, once the Fleshhounds turn around, they should be able to do some horrendous damage in return to the Furies. So just a little bit of food for thought there as we get loaded in. Let's look at the deployment. We are on Arnheim, and Khorne is going with a relatively narrow deployment up on the high ground. Pretty smart. Meanwhile, Tzeentch is wide up on the low ground with just a handful of token forces, some spawn, 2 blue hordes to come contest up here. So, a few things to talk quickly about this matchup. The Skull Cannon, interesting choice. It does a pretty good amount of missile damage. The reload time is low enough, 9.9 seconds, especially with the nerfed the barrier recharge time in 1.1. It can actually get multiple hits in on Tzeentch units before their barrier recharges, which is an issue, or at least it was an issue for some cannon type artillery for the 1.1 update. But in general, chariot type units tend to be pretty decent against Tzeentch. Like in terms of melee, infantry wise, other than Forsaken, no melee infantry is going to trade that well into the skull cannon. I mean, the armor certainly helps. Pretty low defense, but still, animations and the anti-infantry damage and disruption as well can be very helpful here in this matchup. Let's see. Definitely got to use its ammunition, move into melee, move it back out, shoot some more. Kind of rinse and repeat that cycle to get best effect from it. Let's see right now. The Exalted Bloodthirster, forward positioning, kind of scouting a little bit here, looking in the woods, trying to draw the Lord of Change out of position. Exalted Bird Boy flying over. He's got his Exalted Flamer also moving up here to support this high ground force as well. Tzeentch should be able to take a pretty good defensive position here and just kind of capture these 2 objectives. Right now, there's no pressure from Khorne out onto the low ground, just more halberds being brought in here, and the Blood Reaper on foot as well. It's going to have the Locus of Abjuration. Yes, this is a 66% ward save, spell resistance specifically. Obviously very useful against Tzeentch if they're going to be doing some AoE damage, but looks like Transmutation of Lead being used, which it's interesting, definitely. Transmutation of Lead, there's a reason you don't see this spell that much, because it's not incredibly magic efficient, 11 wins of magic. I mean, it is an AoE melee attack nerf. 33% weapon damage, I guess, is higher than what it used to be, but with no AP component, it's going to be only marginally useful against this Khorne build. And, I mean, lowering melee attacks certainly helps, but Khorne also, I mean, the one thing they do have access to in terms of abilities is attack buffs. It's really not that much of an issue for them. What is an issue, certainly, though, is this brutal Flamer volley here. The Exalted Flamer just getting some nasty shots, absolutely savaging this unit of halberds. And the Exalted Bloodletter is also a very expensive unit to be taking all that fire from the blues. So Khorne's going to have to pressure forward, but all this means that the Exalted Lord of Change, fighting in combat, gets caught. Couple of attack animations from the Bloodthirster. No Kairos, right? So he can't cast Regrowth on himself. And real HP damage done will stay. Obviously, the barrier will be able to replenish, but some Khorne Fleshhounds and Furies thrown down onto the low ground just to occupy these units, keep them from coming up onto the high ground. In terms of points secured, open ground objective number 1, yeah, has been secured by Tzeentch already, just by pure capture weight. Top ground now in Khorne's control. Look at this, though. This is super, super bad. Exalted, the Flamer gets caught out by the Bloodthirster here. The Exalted Flamer is pretty quick. I mean, 50 speed can definitely get away from a lot of infantry units. No way it's getting away from this guy, and since the Lord of Change is, you know, not able to contest really either, can't jump in to bail out. If he had both Lords of Change in position, he maybe could have gone 2v1 there against the Exalted Bloodthirster along with the Flamer, and maybe would have salvaged the Flamer, or at least Flamer would have taken a couple of hits destined for the Lords of Change. But anyway, speaking of Lords of Change, one is going to get engaged again. The Exalted Blight, the Exalted Bloodthirster in the air. Skull Cannon moving over to help finish off the last of these blues. Khorne on objectives, though, is going to start to run into a little bit of trouble. They're losing on this low ground. That mobile force sent in to contest obviously wasn't able to wrest control of this objective. One halberd came down, now getting a little bit isolated and soloed here as more Bloodthirsters also move in. The Hero, Blood Reaper, and Skull Cannon, though, moving downhill. Helped provide a little bit of extra melee punch. You can see the giant bombardment from Tzeentch up on the high ground that we're probably missing. Mostly a swing and a miss there. Another transmutation of lead on the Exalted Bloodthirster as he chases E-Bird, the big E-Bird about. And here comes the Skull Cannon having a grand old time. I love the animations for this thing. I do wish it was maybe like 100 points cheaper. I don't really know. I feel like the Skull Cannon needs a slight, very slight buff. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Right now, it is just soaking in the damage, though. I mean, I say soaking in the damage. It's actually not getting that much contact. Low accuracy of the Blue Horrors and the small hitbox of the Skull Cannon actually means that a lot of these shots are not making contact. The armor certainly helps as well. Obviously, 110 armor versus the relatively low AP of the Blue Horrors. I mean, they do have 2 AP, which is not bad, certainly, but relying on that high volume, non-AP damage means high armor units won't take nearly as much damage for them, especially as you start to go over 100 armor. Really, you'll start to notice a pretty significant effect. Anyway, Exalted Bloodthirster now moving down. He's this is the thing in this matchup. If you're chasing around Lords of Change with your Exalted Bloodthirster, you need to make sure you're still getting value from them otherwise, and they're not just getting led on a wild goose chase, right? Because if they end up not accruing value during the battle, even if they don't go down, right? Even if your Exalted Bloodthirster doesn't get killed, it's not contributing over the course of the battle. It's not fulfilling its role, right? So it comes in here, does a huge splash attack, a couple of big attacks on those pink horse just to disrupt them, not allow them to continue to fire. Skull Cannon pulls back, gets a hit on the Lord of Change there, knocks him down, and keeps his barrier from replenishing. I think it's actually going to switch, though. Had replenished a couple of shots. Removes the barrier from the Exalted Lord of Change there, gets a hit. Bloodthirster also gets a hit. So let's watch. I think these guys might have some matched combat animations. Let's keep it close and see. Maybe not if Big Bird chooses to try and disengage here. Going to take a couple of big hits in the back from the Exalted Bloodthirster, but it does look like he's able to get away. Throws in the Lord of Change to kind of, screen for him, if you will. But back to the objectives. More than double victory tickets for Tzeentch in a pretty commanding position here. No contest on this objective number 2. All in on objective number 1 at this point, and Tzeentch also not contesting the high ground at all. But Yeah, the Exalted Flamer back on track. The issue with Flamers in general in this matchup is they can be a little bit tricky to protect against Khorne mobility. And see now the Flesh Hounds moving in. These blue horrors are going to be in a perfect position to intercept. But they will start dying fairly quickly, and just by weight of mass, Doggos punch through the good Flesh Hounds, punch through and actually engage the Exalted Flamer in melee. And now the Doggos will run out of steam pretty quickly, but doesn't stop other units from coming to assist. We've got the Minotaurs of Khorne deployed now, trying to just get the power to make sure that the Lords of Change just have to stay in the air, right? Like, they literally have no option to go onto the ground now because, well, they just don't have options either way. In the air, there's the Exalted Bloodthirster. On the ground, there's the Minotaurs of Khorne, which will also do a great job of helping take out these spawn of Tzeentch. More Flesh Hounds coming in to keep this big box of blue horrors from blanketing the bulls in blue fire. Bulls then get a charge in. Minotaurs, wow, did they actually, like, oh, they're knocking back the Flamer. That makes sense. I mean, the Flamers really don't have much mass at all. And now, in an engagement with the Exalted Bloodthirster and the Minotaurs, I mean, that is really worst case scenario for that poor Exalted Flamer. He has just had the worst day possible. Anyway, regular Lord of Change does come back, though. It's helping to finish off these Bloodletters. Notice the capture weight here with the Forsaken is going to be slightly holding for Tzeentch. I mean, the Skull Cannon is ticking it up maybe just ever so slightly, but it is really not much to write home about, certainly. And the Skull Cannon is going to maneuver out of the area of effect anyway, so it's a little bit tricky. Khorne's getting far enough behind on points where they might need to actually go for a 3 cap here. To that effect, these dual hand weapon warriors moving on to objective number 2. Got more halberds moving down onto objective number 1, and a couple more bloodletters as well as flesh hounds. One of them is the Exalted Bloodletter. So I believe now the Exalted Lord of Change, yes, was finished off in that little pitched melee engagement there. Obviously the Flamer went down too. Now Bloodthirster is flying after the regular Lord of Change. And our Minotaur friends are eating blueberry spawn. Probably shouldn't eat that. Probably would cause some horrific mutations. But who knows? Maybe Beastman's stomachs can handle it. And especially like Khorne Beastman stomachs. Anyway, hopefully we'll get some more Beastman units in the future. But some more Forsaken moving in, the spawn, the Tzeentch player just all in pathing onto the objective to maintain capture weight is probably, honestly, the right call at this point, just to try and maintain. He's less than 1,000 points away from victory, so he really just needs to hold one objective at this point. So just go all in, throw all your resources onto this center objective, and especially the infantry bodies, as long as they can hold. The problem is, Khorne kind of predicted this in a good way. These Bloodletters having anti-infantry in this type of an objective scrap where they need to wrest capture weight as quickly as possible, Bloodletters are really the ideal unit, or one of the ideal units, to try and get this done with their awesome offensive output. They can cut through these blue horrors in a pretty quick time and make sure to maintain this objective. Yeah, they actually fully maintain the capture weight there. Over here, similar situation, maybe a little bit less decisive, but certainly dual hand weapon Khorne warriors will outclass Tzeentch Forsaken, not to mention a Fleshhound rear charge there. Looks like he's going to be able to actually achieve the 3 cap. Yep, objective number 2 hasn't quite been captured yet. Not quite enough capture weight to finish things off. Looks like the Forsaken finally shatter, and that is enough to swing things just about in time. 45-60 score for Tzeentch here. So what that means for Khorne is they have to hold all 3 objectives until they get within 440 points of Tzeentch's score, right? So he needs to hold this until he gets about 4,100 points, give or take, right? And then at that point, he could go to a 2 cap and still win. But it's going to be tricky here. Tzeentch is going to go all in to try and cap just 1 objective in this late game. And see the top objective here is apparently being lightly held, but we do have some flesh hounds hidden in the woods and halberds advancing. A couple Forsaken, no, just a Forsaken and a blue horror here are trying to move up to rest this objective. Also got forward pressure on these other objectives as well. These blue horrors just barely pathing into the corner of that capture. Still not enough to actually get it done. More spawn coming in as well. So it's going to be tight, guys. It's going to be super, super close. Let's see if Khorne can hold. Khorne obviously great on offense, maybe not so great on defense, arguably. Just amazing in melee, so probably can play defense just fine. To be honest, Fleshhounds get a great charge. Some of those Forsaken go tumbling down the hill, just sliding for an absolute slip and slide ride. More Bloodletters being summoned in. The Bloodletters having the extra speed, 38 speed versus only 28 speed of the warrior units, is very beneficial in Domination. One of the reasons I love Bloodletters in reserve. Regular Lord of Change finally gets finished off by the Exalted Bloodthirster, who, let's give a round of applause for him. 5,000 damage value, has managed to hunt down both of the big birds, two absolute priority targets here. And because Khorne has won so decisively on engagements now at this point, we can't see the army damage value, unfortunately, in replays. I really wish we could, the total army damage value, but they've done enough. Hold on, you can see Tzeentch was able to recapture this objective just through capture weight, but not before Khorne was able to get within striking distance to actually achieve victory. We got the Skull Cannon back in here as well now, supporting the Fleshhounds. Exalted Bloodthirster has really nothing left besides getting blasted by tons of shooting, which, you know, he can avoid that. Looks like we'll have the Khorne Sword drop, bombardment as well. Boom, just wrecking this blob of Tzeentch. A lot of those demons immediately just get banished there, and that should be a win. Just barely taking the lead now. Khorne is in the commanding position in the driver's seat. That should be a victory. So a very fun one. Big thanks to thanks for submitting that. Super fun replay. I like to see Khorne versus Tzeentch. I like to see Khorne versus everyone, to be honest. Like I mentioned, Khorne being the most well-balanced faction. Really enjoy playing them. I really enjoy watching them, even though they are like the melee murder faction, right? Absolutely. At the same time, there's a lot of nuance in the types of builds and the setups that you want to bring against different opponents, similar to like what Warriors of Chaos were in the past, and Beastmen to a lesser extent. And Beastmen can play a little bit more with a little bit more flexibility, but just in general, that nuanced rush is very fun to play, in my opinion. And Khorne fulfills that very well. Bloodthirster, big boy, gets it all done at the end of the day. The Exalted Bloodletters don't pay back in value, but get almost 400 number kills, which is great. Like I said, you got to cut through that chaff tactically for Domination, especially for the capture. So that tactical success, big time for sure. The Skull Cannon doesn't quite pay for itself, but I like the disruption and the pick here as well. Halbert's doing a pretty decent job. Fleshhounds, of course, are typical MVPs. I love the pick of the Minotaurs, too. That was pretty unexpected for me, but they ended up paying for themselves. I think one in reserve isn't a terrible idea, to be honest. If your opponent chooses to go very heavy into, like, spawn, and maybe also with soul grinders, which are not amazing, but you might see them. Lords of Change you'll definitely see. So I don't totally hate this. The rest of the build setup worked reasonably well. Also, maybe a tiny bit more mobility would have been nice, but the Fleshhounds all did what they needed to, for the most part, especially on that map. There's not a ton of room to maneuver. There is definitely enough. But anyway, on Tzeentch's side, a lot of things are going to struggle to pay for themselves. On the top end, the spawns generally do pretty well. I really like the spawns here in tandem with other units especially. Like if you're in the situation as Tzeentch, right, where you've got an Exalted Bloodthirster hunting down your Exalted Lord of Change, thing to do is fly over to your spawn and press the manual land button so that you know, you can bait the charge down into your spawn. Spawn will get a surround. They'll start armor sundering. They'll start getting some good attacks in there. Then the Lord of Change can turn around and get like a rear charge into the Exalted Bloodthirster. That's typically the way I like to do things. Sometimes the Bloodthirster will just, you know, refuse to charge down into the spawn anyway, in which case you can just cackle and run around and cast spells like you want to. So it's great. Anyway, Blue Horrors, super cost effective. They are due for a nerf, I think, in the next update. Hopefully they get one. Forsaken also, Blue Forsaken do a pretty good job. They can struggle against some Khorne infantry, but they can also get good engagements if they, you know, get good engagements like rear charges and stuff. You don't want to take a face engagement against Bloodletters, but you do want to recharge them for sure. Fury is also doing a reasonably decent job. So very fun replay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. See you next time.